Hi, you are listening to the Conflict and Development in Africa podcast. This podcast is for policymakers, governments, researchers, students, businesses, and anyone that is interested in conflict and development issues in Africa. On this podcast, we hear from experts from across Africa and the world. Your host, Dr. Michael Nwankpa, will ask the questions you would want answers to. Michael Nwankpa has an extensive experience spanning over a decade studying, researching, writing, and consulting on conflict and development issues in Africa.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Conflict and Development in Africa podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Nwankpa. Today I'm joined by a very important guest, Honorable Jeanine Mabunda, to discuss the natural resource field war in the Democratic Republic of Congo and its political economy. Honorable Jeanine Mabunda is currently a member of parliament for Bumba Ikota province in DRC. She's also a honorary House Speaker at DRC. She's a former Speaker of the National Assembly of the DRC. She served from April 2019 to December 2020. She's a former Minister for Public Enterprise, and she's also a fervent advocate for women's rights, which has earned her a lot of national and international awards. She also has a foundation called the Silence Foundation, where she supports several social and community projects, from infrastructure such as roads and bridges to clean water to the communities and solar projects. Honorable Mabunda, you've had an illustrious career so far, and you've done an amazing feat. It is a very great pleasure to have you today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you to receiving me today to your podcast.
You're
I'm
welcome.
happy
I'll
myself to
just
speak about Africa from Africa.
That is good. That's interesting. That's interesting. I love that. I love that. So let me go straight to the question. DRC is one of the is a blessed country. You know, blessed like many other countries in Africa. Is blessed with abundant natural resources. We're talking from arable lands to forest, to oil, and to vast deposits of minerals, from cobalt to copper. Yet it is one of the poorest countries that is bedeviled with political instability. Can you help me make sense of this paradox and the factors that ail this blessed country?
Yes, you name it. For most of the people, they do consider DRC for today and for the future, like what the uh, in the conversation about the energy uh, and from for the whole world. So uh, we see less of the past that it's not truly the country who have the best assets and who seems to be blessed, who got the better development agenda for their population, because they are subject to a lot of attention, a lot of pressure, a lot of power battle. And with DRC, we have seen it for 20 years. So having assets, being mineral rich can be a blessing, but it can be also a misfortune, depending on how you manage the geopolitical side of it, the security side of it, and the governance side of it for your community and your citizen.
Oh, brilliant. Now, speaking of geopolitical, the geopolitical dimension of it. So, if we look at the trajectory and the political development of DRC as a nation, it was going back to the 19th century, and down to now. So, we see a country that seems to be in a perpetual state of warfare. And one interesting detail is the sheer involvement of external actors, outside the continent and also within the region in this conflict. Why is the DRC caught in that web? If you look at what is the scale of this geopolitical competition, and how much does external contribution contribute to that conflict?
Can you explain a little bit more? Because the sound was not good.
Okay, so what I'm saying is, if you look at the history of DRC, you look at its trajectory, you look at its development, even from the 19th century down to this period, we see a country that seems to be in a perpetual state of war. But one important
Mm-hmm.
detail is we see external involvement. Speaking of the geopolitical competition that you mentioned, what is the scale of these
Mm-hmm.
external actors, and why is
Uh, uh,
DRC caught in that web?
yes, I think you mentioned two paradox which are really pressuring on Africa as a mineral rich or resource rich region, and DRC just one case among it. Uh, you see, there is two lanes which are very important and which may be of impact on the development of peace or non-peace situation, then conflict situation in a country like DRC. There is the mining geopolitics as of today. You know that since the Cold War end, there is another battle which is more subtle, but which is the race for economic power and economic future of some big countries, Western countries, United States or China, depends on their ability to get an ongoing supply in terms of natural resources. USA, China, Russia, but also Western Europe, India, and new emerging superpower are now attract all attracted by the way they can project and plan their future in terms of access to materials, access to resources. And each country has its way to roll over its strategy, and Africa is in the target of this race. Because Africa is one of the still unexploited, untapped reserve in terms of some resources. And it's also obvious that Africa, and especially DRC, we've got it all. We've got copper, we've got cobalt, we've got diamond, we've got lithium, we've got tin, and all that really it's a sort of, yes, attractive point, but also it's a sort of threat on the development of some of this country mineral rich. It has been said sometime that in fact we are just a playground. In fact, we are just, Africa can sometimes be seen like a playground for superpower because they are the one to decide, they are the one to put the agenda, and as soon as they have drawn their agenda, they decide to roll it over, and you are not stakeholder or part of it, despite the fact that the resource they are speaking about in London, in Brussels, in New York, in Paris, in Tokyo, or in any Chinese city, these resources are embedded and are laid down in the African region. So there is a conversation about the future of the planet, the future, the social and economic development of the rest of the world, giving the demographic pressure. But how will you implement this development? It's with the natural resources of Africa. So the conversation is about Africa, but without Africans. And sometimes this imbalance is driving some people to react, either positively, either negatively. When it's negatively, positively, you go with trade and negotiation and lobby and being part of all this international organization where you are supposed to be heard as a country regarding trade, regarding security, and all components which makes access to this supply or access to this product sustainable. That's the positive way. The negative way is that where people feel that this reserve of resources in Africa is not well managed or not well distributed or not made easily accessible to the superpower, you can see some rising of conflict. And it's mining related conflict. You will see, referring to a report of the United Nations, that since the 90s, we have seen 18 violent conflicts inspired or impulsed by the race about resource exploitation. And if we had on the top of it the new issue of the climate change, effect on the pressure for conflicts are related. They just vary in their intensity. They just vary in their geography. It can be an intra-battle, an intra-country battle, whether local forces are battling for resource access. What we have seen in Sudan in the last 10 years. It can be regional, where you see that some countries have problem at their borders and frontiers because of their perception regarding access or logistics to access to these resources. And it can be international, where hidden behind some civil war, some rebellions, they are superpower trying to reshape the rhythm of power for better access to these resources.
Well, interesting. Let me take you on from the last statement, talking about superpowers, fueling this crisis and hiding to in order to reshape, access to the country. Two superpowers that have been in DRC is China and USA, and I think China has
Yeah.
got some sort of agreement with the DRC. And there's been some subtle, not too subtle rivalry between these two. Like we see, broadly in the continent, we see a sort of, race between China and the USA or the Western world, to say. But in DRC, is very particular. It's very specific. Can you explain that, broader scale rivalry between China as it relates to minerals in DRC and how that influence the conflicts in DRC?
Yes, regarding DRC and the superpower, the race of the superpower with access to mining resources, I think we should be honest to go back 20 years ago, because our mining code, the first mining code, was dating back 2002. And at that time, the country was just getting out of a civil war. It was a new power. We were just getting out of the Mobutu's era, where we had been a little bit isolated, diplomatically speaking. So we were trying to build a way to people to come and see a war-torn, devastated country without roads, without electricity, without easy access to our mining site. We were having an incentive to the rule of the mining codes. And we made the country open to everybody. But it's also true that making the country available for everybody did not resonate in the same manner, depending whether you are in the United States or in Asia. And as time was going by, we had at first some American interest in the mining sector. I remember there were Pubs Dodge, and the situation of the country. I mean, the analysis they did at that time regarding the security outlook of the country made some American interest pulling out of country, pulling out of DRC in the 2009, 2010. When they pull out, obviously, also, it creates an empty space or a gap. And there were other competitors ready out there waiting for some opportunities, especially the Chinese interest, and they jump on it. So it's not like if DRC has deliberately chosen China or United States. You know, in business, you don't normally, you look at the best opportunity according to your best interest. At that time, also, maybe some Western power were considering that investing in the mining chain in DRC, which were also entered with a lot of rumors about bad condition of working for the kids, for the woman, about lack of logistics, about civil war, and all the bad reputation it can create for listed companies of the Western world, made eventually the gate open for some other countries whose dynamic is different. Also, the perception in Africa, and it's not only for DRC, because if people want to insist that Chinese are in DRC, Chinese are in DRC, Chinese came in DRC like they came in Gabon, like they came in Angola, like they came in, and like they are in all over Africa. And the question that an astute observer should raise is to ask, why have the Chinese succeed to be present in all the African region on the last decade? Not to criticize it, not also to support it, but just to say, how does it come that many different African countries, because Congo is not Ivory Coast, is not Angola, is not South Africa, all country has its specificity. But how does it come that the Chinese interest, the Chinese backbone, the Chinese financier, the China, how does it come that China has widespread all over the African continent? It will be interesting to be also a little bit critical and to learn from that what it shows about the perception that the African continent has about its relationship with the Western world. I don't blame anybody, but I also think that if a country like United States is authorized to refuse this merger because it doesn't protect the interest of America first, if France is able to refuse this or this takeover because it doesn't protect the interests of France as a country, why should we not expect African countries to do the same and to say, I'm trying to get investors. The curve to get investors coming from this part of the world is slow or rapid. Should I go for the slower one or should I go for the quickest one? And that's how the conversation has to be shaped. It's not that we do like or we do not like this of this country. But people should understand that now African countries are mature and they also look at their interests first. If you say America first, why should I not say DRC first or Africa first? That's the reality. And every day, on a daily basis, with the BRICS rising, it shows also to us that there is a willingness in the rest of the world, in the rest of the non Western world, to see that our economic interest is also better heard, better addressed, better protected. But all is not bad because we have seen that with this new way of going to the market to look for investors in our countries, the message has been understood. The message has been understood and there is positive story. Do you know, for example, that there is a corridor, a logistical corridor who's going to be created between Angola and DRC to allow DRC to export by a quickest channel his mineral to the rest of the world. For the time being, we are using the southern SADC road, which is longer than the future corridor that we will have between Congo and Angola. And despite that, this logistic is belonging between two countries, Angola and Congo, DRC Congo, we have seen that European Union and United States have proposed to our country to be part of the funding of this logistical road to boost, to ease, to speed up the export of minerals coming from DRC. So it shows that they have understood our message. It's not a question of we do prefer this country to another, we've got the same cultural history, or we have got the same institutional system. No, it's a question of interest. Countries these days are run and led by the interest in the way that it has to bring some added value to the country, to the treasury account of this country, and indirectly to the citizen of this country. So, but the good story is that we now try to negotiate, to bargain, I will say, between all the superpower, because we are a country which is problem solver for the next big economic turnover or the next big economic turnaround imposed by the climate change and its need of strategic minerals.
Honourable, you've made quite interesting points. And I would like to start from one of the points you made, and they're quite all linked together. So in the Cold War, we saw that African had some sort of agency, and then they had that non-alignment policy, and then they could manipulate between the two superpowers at the time. So now what we're seeing also where we could talk about African agency, and then looking at how Africans can also, I don't want to use the words in a negative way, play these sides or look at the best option for them and be able to go for what options best suits them. Now,
Exactly.
if we look at that, if I look at that, which is quite interesting, how does that link into that agency and looking at the African continental free trade and looking at all this bilateral agreement between Angola and DRC? Do you see that as a future? Do you see that happening more often in the future? This kind of bilateral agreement. And does that tie into the African continental free trade? Do you see that as a key to solving in Africa's weak connection into that global trade, where Africa is in a place of weakness when it comes to being tied into the global economy? Do you see this as a key to putting Africa where Africa should be on the table as equal partner in determining global economy, or contributing to being basically respected for what it brings to the table? So I wanted to explore further how that logical corridor between that agreement between DRC and Angola, and how that fits into the African continental free trade, and how that presents a future for boosting Africa's position globally?
Yes, I think you're right. Like I said, Africa is still an unexplored continent. It's an unexplored continent, and Africa, through the lens of its demographic dividend, quite a young population, which means quite a longer future, given the age of its population and its capacity of leapfrogging effect to address all this, I would say, economic and strategic turnaround. It's good also that people have understood that they don't have to force Africa to choose between United States or China, or United States and Russia, or whatever. The message that we receive from the African leader is that it should not be automatically, a conflict or a tension or a geopolitical dispute or race between superpower out of the African region should not be automatically reported, forwarded to the African continent. We don't have to choose between China or United States, Russia or United States. We want, like I said, to leverage the best out of all, because that's how it should be. You have seen recently India, which has nothing to do with Africa, but India is the most populous country of the world. India has also a certain advance on the technological level, and they leverage on it because that's a global race, and on some geopolitical issue which seems to be perceived on a certain tone on the western side of the world. India says, I've got my people, I've got my citizens, I've got my voters, and according to their understanding of the situation, I cannot take a stand position in favor or against this or this situation. I think it was between it was the situation, to name just one. And I think that the African leaders these days are in the same kind of spirit. They said, we want to work with everybody. We don't want to be told or to be taught, like students, that if I'm doing business or if I'm doing politics with this country, I cannot do with the other one. Because the challenge of developing our country or people is so urgent, is so pressuring, that you cannot have the luxury to favor one against another. There is good things on both sides or on many sides, and I think this attitude, this claim from the African country has to be heard, and I think that it's being heard because we've seen now that more and more there is Chinese delegation coming to explain their vision or trying to improve their understanding of the continent by more regular travel on site. We have seen also a lot of the Biden administration traveling around in Africa, which was not the case with the president administration. So I think all that goes in the right direction because together we are stronger. It's not Africa with USA against China or Africa with China against USA. We want to have the good side of both worlds. We want to have the good side of both worlds. It's also true that China comes in Africa with an impressive capacity of funding, with an impressive capacity of delivering on the quickest way for some infrastructure projects, and with less, how to say that, with less judging eyes.
Focus
Not to
on human
say,
rights. Yeah.
yes, it's no. I don't like also this shortcut. because I don't want to say that African countries go to China because they don't pay attention to human rights. It's not the case, but it's just applying a principle of the international law who says that you need to leave the capacity to some population to decide and to judge by themselves for their own destiny.
Hmm.
In that
Hmm.
way, it's how we
Amazing.
should understand the kind of relationship. And too much time, also the international community has shown double standard. And for some people, they do criticize for democracy, for dumped election, for endless mandate of a leader. But in the next country, at the end of the border of the country that they support or they favor, despite endless mandate, they are putting pressure to respect democracy, to stop your appointment at office after 2 mandates. We've seen that very clearly. We've seen that very clearly. So it makes it difficult sometimes for African leaders to accept the double standard and then different ways. And this double standard has been a deterrent in the way people will appraise and perceive Western world. We have to be consistent. You cannot say that this country has made endless election and it's always the same president for 25 years now and it's not a problem, and say to the next door that you need to leave because your constitution says that there is 2 mandates. I don't say that. It's not my position to say that a leader can have endless mandate, but it's just to show the example of the double standard. And this double standard, double treatment, different treatment in the same geopolitical space or in the same continent has put some doubt about discussing, negotiating, and interacting with the Western powers. We have seen what has happened in the former French colonies and the way they perceive the French presence. So that should lead us to be more wise or to find new ways to discuss with the African continent.
Yeah, amazing. I was gonna you link clearly to what I was going to mention. I was going to mention the parallel with what is happening in the French former colonies. We've seen in Niger, we've seen in Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic. Now, but what we've seen as well, we're beginning to see this anti-French sentiment, and then you're seeing also this anti-Western stuff. But as they withdraw, we also see new actors. We see the Russia, we see Wagner Group. We also see new actors within the continent. We see military rulers that are fortifying their positions. So, but I guess my question is, how do we get new actors that to fill in this vacuum? Are they going to be pursuing without them pursuing their own selfish political interests? Maybe have military coup leaders that come to, entrench themselves in that position for their own selfish interests. So how do we, because we've seen again in the absence of all of this, we've seen rebel leaders, maybe several militia groups in DRC, for instance. You've seen, I think that by and large, a cover for it is lack of legitimacy, where we don't have those credible leaders to provide that necessary stuff for the dividend of them, or dividend of being a citizen of that country. So how do we solve that conundrum? How do we get leaders to fill in that gap as all these vacuums are being created by this either Western double standard, also talking about Russia, and talking about all of these actors? How do African actors, African leaders at different levels, how can they fill in that vacuum?
I think the question is complex, and I'm staying very humble. I don't say that my answer are the absolute truth. I can just speak based on my own experience in Africa, in DRC, which is European Union size and try to observe and to understand what I'm hearing from grassroots peoples, from communities, and not just from political or business elite. You speak about coup. When you speak about coup, in fact, coup is the contrary of democracy or perceived like this. But we have forgotten that democracy has created a lot of hope in the late 90s to the African citizen, not the African leaders, but the African citizen, who went from very strong autocratic system. And it's very difficult in poor country like Africa, where people are struggling to eat 3 times a day, to get their kids going at school, to get affordable social infrastructure. It's very difficult to separate or to segregate political democracy from economic and social democracy. I think one of the failure of the democracy inherited from the Western type of society organization is that we have overlooked the fact that we have a very, very young kind or base of society in Africa. Here, 60% in DRC, more than 60% of the people have less than 30 years, more than 60%. And they need to see the sense, the concrete sense of democracy. If they do vote, what do they get? Do they get easy access to education? Do they get proper roads because their parents pay taxes? Do they get the hope or the certainty of an acceptable job to offset expenses they've done to finance their education? And that's where democracy has shown little efficiencies. Every day I'm seeing students or young people telling me, oh, Mrs. And I raise and relay the question to you. I raise and forward the question to you. Maybe you've got an answer, but I'm forwarding this question to all Africans, to all Africans who are in position to work, to think, to act. The question of for young people is, you say that Russia is not a good system. They have no democracy. China is not a good system. They have no democracy. United Arab Emirates, it's not democracy. People do not vote there. You say France is a good system, United States is a good system, or UK. But looking at internet, looking on social media, I'm seeing Chinese having an affordable life. I'm seeing Russian having quite a life. I'm seeing United Arab Emirates developing in less than 25 years and being a very world of notice country. And they do not use election every 5 years. They don't have constitution. It's not president. It's king in United Arab Emirates or in Morocco. So when young people see that there are other systems out of democracy, which is working and which is delivering social basic needs for the population, while democracy all over Africa and even in some European countries is not delivering its promises, it will be disappointed by the election type of vote for democracy at regular cycle. And this despair, this lack of hope, or this lack of confidence in democracy being able to deliver social promises for the most or the majority of the citizen may create this situation of military coup that you mentioned. Military coup, I'm not for it. I'm not for it because I think that there is more advantages in democracy than in military coup. But we should try to understand what were the seeds of this military coup in Guinea and in Gabon and other countries. What was the seeds? The seeds was a bad governance. A bad governance, a governance which is tribal, family-oriented, and kleptocratic group of friends. So governance or lack of it may create despair and may create lack of hope, leading to this kind of brutal transition or brutal situation. I'm not for it because I think democracy has also proven its value in Africa,
mm,
whether we look at Kenya, whether we look at Liberia, whether we look at Ghana, to name but few, and why not South Africa? So we
mm,
should not throw in the bath the positive advantage of democracy, but it's a very fragile exercise, and the sense of urgency in Africa for the expectation, the claim, the ambition of our young people is very strong. And so we should amplify the rhythm by which we are trying to transforming Africa with more opportunity for young peoples. That's
mm,
for me very key. You cannot just have a political democracy where people go one day to vote and then our leaders forget them for 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And when they vote again, it doesn't improve never. So that is really the
mm,
challenge
mm,
of the classical, in bracket, democracy. If democracy, political democracy, do not match with economic democracy, this imbalance is creating tension.
mm, mm. I agree with you 100%. And these are the questions that I'm exploring in one of the books that I'm currently writing, looking at them, challenging liberal democracy in Africa and how it's also contributing to militarization in Africa. But speaking of that, if I bring it back to DRC, we've seen, DRC has, endured maybe like two civil wars, and it's had impact on strong economic impact, social impact on the citizen, especially the women and the children. And you've been involved. If I look at the work you've done, the amazing work you've done in terms of like children that have been deployed in combat in these wars, or women that have been victims of this war, how far have we come looking at that impact on this
Yes,
demographic, women and children?
that's why we do not like all what is linked with violence, use of violence, whether it's military, whether it's rebel-led. All what is violence is not good because you know when it starts, you don't know when it ends. And the first victim of all this violence are usually more women and their kids. I think that, the consequences of all this security situation is that women are more vulnerable, they are exposed. Exposed meaning that whether it's about mining race, artisanal mining, they are in the value chain, but in very desperate working condition where they can face sexual blackmail, where they can face violence. That's for the mining chain. If you are in a disorganized, conflict-torn region where people are digging and looting mining. But the war itself, it's a risk and a threat, especially for the woman, because when you come in a city, even if you are the smartest rebel, you need water, you need to be fed. And who should you ask to for that? It's woman. And this proximity with people who are in a conflict mode is very dangerous for the woman and for their children. That's why you have seen that Congo has a very serious or significant rate about rape and violence on women. And that's why public authorities, government, since 10 years now, since 2013, sorry, are trying to address it by having special envoy, by listening more and organizing platform of defense with network of NGO. So yes, conflict are affecting at first women and their children, and it's not a tale or a luxury to tell it. Probably also sometimes it seems like an annoying song. People say, well, Congo, capital of rape, but behind the statistics, there are very hard, very painful human and woman situation. Now we've got an Eastern Congo's tense situation, a security situation with so-called M23 rebels. It makes that Congo has 7 million internal displaced people within its border. I think it's the biggest figure of internal displaced people in their own country, 7 million. And let's imagine what are the conditions of the women in this refugee camp in their own country. It's not that they are elsewhere, they are in their own country. They've got the passport of this country, but they are living in bad condition. Uh, that gives you an idea about how women and their kids can be exploited without access to intimacy, water, sanitization. So war is affecting women more seriously than men because they are the first row of the battle when it comes, whether because they are vulnerable or when after having win their war, the new power or I will say the rebel leader or the military leaders are using them for daily tasks. So yes, I think that this is an issue and we should keep on calling about that. We should keep on denouncing and breaking the silence about this behavior, especially now that all over the world stood up for this conversation about fighting against violence of women, even if it's in different way. It's Me Too in the United States. It's fighting against sexual violence with, for example, Dr. Mukwege in DRC, and a numerous of more anonymous NGOs who are doing a tremendous work. Because women should feel secure in their own country, in their own land, in their own community.
Interesting. Before I come to the last question, I wanted to ask what the DRC government is doing, because we've seen again they've had several
The DRC?
legislation. Yeah, the DRC itself, the government of the DRC, they've had several legislations. So they think there was a mining law at one point to regulate the activities of the these external companies, transnational companies that are mining, and the impact is having on the people and on the war. So what is DRC? What is doing in terms of legislation at the legislative level, and also in terms of implementing these laws? What are they doing to regulate these economic activities that are you know so what I'm saying is, at the legislative level, we've seen where there are different legislations that have been uh, established at the legislative level to regulate this mining stuff by the transnational companies, whether it's a Chinese company, whether it's this. What impact is that having in terms of curbing these issues that are inspiring all this conflict, that are also having all this ripple effect on citizens, that are causing them economic woes, economic problems that are leading them into all of these poor states that have been living in refugee situation?
Yes, for example, about registration or measure taken by the states of Congo regarding back positioning of women, violence of women in the mining sector. We have, for example, trained a lot of policemen and soldiers to make them sensitive to our existing law, which is dating back 2006. We've got an existing law who's condemning rape of women and describing all the cases of rape which are not authorized, which are uh, condemned by law. So the law does exist, and the law has been refreshed recently, where we even add, we even go beyond, because we said not only we are condemning, not only it's a penalty, but we should also go beyond that and say that you have ruined the life of a victim, and we need to repair that. So we have now created a reparation fund by a law, which was brought to the parliament in a manner that it's not just condemning the perpetrators, but it's also making sure that if the rape has been committed by a public servant, depending on the states of Congo, has a reparation funds which can protect the victim, where she can ask for reparation being the penalty, the fine that the perpetrator has to pay according to his nation. And this is quite recent. It has been approved in 2023, just to show the nation of the public authorities. It's also true that we have now special dedicated policemen and women to welcome victims of rape at the police station. Because in the past it was a little bit difficult, you are not well welcomed by a policeman because he doesn't know really what is the law, what is the psychological behavior, what is the first emergency measure to take. So with the help of the United Nations, we have set up a training program for our policemen so that they can face this kind of situation. And even in some place, like in Bukavu, which is in eastern Congo, we've got police stations specially dedicated in a secluded area for women victims of rape, getting a special support from a special police trained for that. This is an example of legislation. We can also say the rule of example is very important. In Congo, we were able to condemn, and it's not an easy task to condemn even high-ranked generals who committed rape on women, and it was a breakthrough. It was done in 2013, and before that, you can look at the rule of precedent regarding this matter in Congo. People were thinking that a high-ranked general cannot be condemned for rape because rape was culturally tolerated, I would say. So it was a case of the beginning of a change in the behavior of the public servant of the state regarding the matter. So it shows that it's possible by law to change the situation. Then if you don't go for better implementation of law, dedicate counter for women victim of rape, it's also about training of the woman, knowing their right in general, not only when you are raped, but also how you have to behave as a woman, chief of a family, to make your right respected. Whether it's about inheriting from your man who died, whether it's about learning some skills to be supportive of your family. So making women aware of their rights is quite important too. Then I think it's also very important to get more attention, more focus on the economic empowerment of women. Economic empowerment of women, not only for some grassroots, but to help them to believe in themselves, to become self-confident, to get knowledge of for some sense of leadership, to dream big. Because the African culture is not pushing really a little girl to dream big. Oprah Winfrey, which is in the United States, was born in the United States. I wish that the next Oprah Winfrey comes from Africa because she has been so much loved as a little girl that she can believe in it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today to today's episode on natural resource field war in the DRC. Today, you've been listening to Honourable Jeanine Mabunda, the Honourable Minister of Parliament at the DRC. And she's blessed us with a great insight into some of the most protracted and complicated topic and issue in DRC. Stay tuned and please subscribe to our podcasts on Spotify. We're on Spotify, on Apple, and also follow and subscribe to our YouTube page for more episodes and more updates. Thank you, and see you next time.